Welcome to another Wolf Romance Fantasy audiobook. Let's begin. Chicago. The year 1920. The warehouse reeked of mildew and fear. I pinched my nose and stepped through the splintered doorway, the smell hitting me like a punch. Inside, shadows pooled around rusted barrels and broken crates. The night watchman sat hunched on a wooden stool, his face pale as milk. His hands shook like leaves in a storm as he tried to light a cigarette. "Tell me what you saw," I said, crouching down to meet his wide, trembling eyes. "Shadows," he stammered, dropping the match. "They howled, miss. Shadows with claws. I ran for my life." I glanced over at the body, my stomach turning. The victim lay sprawled on the floor, his chest shredded as if by some monstrous animal. Blood glistened in the dim light. I kept my voice calm. "Shadows don't leave claw marks," I murmured, mostly to myself. The watchman flinched, mumbling about howling again. I straightened up, brushing off my skirt. The industrial district was a maze of narrow streets and old factories. Over the past month, 4 people had been found dead in places like this, alone, at night, torn apart. The victims had nothing in common. They weren't rich, weren't tied to any gang, random deaths it seemed. But all the same, it felt like a pattern. On the floor, near the body, something caught the faint light from my flashlight. A single silver hair, thick and coarse. I picked it up carefully with tweezers, slipping it into a small envelope. Not human, I thought. Not any animal I could name either. Back at the station, Timmy waited near the door. The kid was barely out of short pants, but he had an uncanny knack for knowing the city's pulse, always wearing that same flat cap, and a grin too big for his freckled face. "Got something for me, Timmy?" I asked. He leaned in close, his voice low. "You heard of the Stardust Club? That speakeasy everyone's talking about?" "A speakeasy?" I raised an eyebrow. "Yeah, down on Canal Street. Singer there's something else. People say she just showed up one night. No past, no nothing." He looked around, making sure no one was listening. "Might want to check it out." A singer with no past, a speakeasy buzzing with secrets, and clawed shadows prowling the city. My skin prickled. Something was definitely out there. Something not human. When I walked into the Stardust Club, the first thing I noticed was the music. The band on stage was playing a lively jazz tune that made my feet itch to dance. The brass horns blared, the piano keys tumbled, and the drums kept everything in perfect rhythm. All around me, the crowd swayed and hummed along. The 1920s were alive and well here, in a room filled with laughter, clinking glasses, and the soft glow of amber light from the chandeliers. I took a seat in the corner, slipping into the shadows. My plain coat and hat didn't draw much attention, which was just the way I liked it. This wasn't a social call. My eyes roamed over the scene, people dressed in their finest, feathers in their hair, pearls glinting around their necks, suits pressed and polished. I tapped my finger on the table, waiting for her. Then she appeared. Eleanor. She moved onto the stage like she owned it, wearing a midnight blue dress that shimmered like water under moonlight. Her hair, a cascade of dark curls, framed a face that was both delicate and strong. She glanced out at the crowd, her green eyes sharp, as if she were searching for something, or someone. She raised the microphone to her lips, and the room fell silent. Not because anyone told them to, but because they couldn't help it. When she started to sing, every note pulled at you, made you want to lean in closer. Her voice was smooth as cream, rich as honey. But something about her wasn't quite right. As everyone watched her, I watched her differently. I noticed the way her fingers clenched the microphone stand a little too tightly, the way her eyes flicked toward the exits, like she was mapping out a way to escape. She was too poised, too perfect. And perfect, in my experience, usually meant trouble. When her song ended, the crowd erupted into applause. Eleanor smiled and nodded graciously, but it didn't reach her eyes. She stepped down from the stage, blending effortlessly into the throng of admirers. I moved to the bar, pretending to order a drink. From my vantage point, I saw a man, sharp suit, shadowy grin, slide up beside her. He whispered something in her ear. Eleanor's face didn't change, but she turned her head just enough to let a small, mysterious smile curl her lips. Then, without a word, she disappeared through a door in the back. I watched the door for a moment, then sipped the drink I hadn't really ordered. Something told me that Eleanor wasn't just another singer in a speakeasy. Something told me she was hiding a secret, and I was determined to find out what it was. Leo sat behind a massive oak desk, papers spread out in front of him. The room smelled of cigars and old leather. The only light came from a single lamp, casting long shadows across the walls. His fingers drummed on the desk as he flipped through the documents. Each page listed numbers, debts, and investments. His iron grip on the pack's finances. His control over the pack wasn't just about strength. It was about knowing where every coin and favor went. One of his enforcers entered the room, a wiry man with darting eyes. He stood at the edge of the desk, hat in hand, shifting nervously from foot to foot. "Spit it out," Leo said, not looking up. "It's her, boss," the man stammered. Eleanor's back. For a moment, Leo froze, his hand, hovering over a ledger, curled into a fist. Then, as if nothing had happened, he leaned back in his chair, his face unreadable. "And what exactly does she want?" The man hesitated. "We don't know yet. She's been seen at the Stardust Club, but she's keeping to herself." Leo's calm slipped for the briefest second. His eyes narrowed and his lips pressed into a thin line. Then he sighed and waved the man off. "Find out more, and make sure the pack doesn't hear a word about this." The enforcer blinked. "You mean they don't know?" Leo's voice was icy. "They don't need to know. If you let it slip, you'll answer to me." He leaned forward, his smile slow and cold. "And trust me, you don't want that." The man nodded quickly, backed out of the room and closed the door behind him. Leo sat there for a moment, the edges of the papers curling under his fingers. When he finally stood, he walked to a small cabinet, opened it, and pulled out a bottle of whiskey. On a shelf above it, a framed photograph gathered dust. He picked it up, his thumb brushing across the glass. It was a picture of the pack, taken years ago. A younger Leo stood near the front, his arms slung around the shoulders of another wolf, and there, in the back, Eleanor's face was circled in pencil. The pencil had pressed so hard it left a groove in the photo. Leo stared at the picture. "Not again," he said, his voice low, almost a growl. He poured a drink, but didn't sip it right away. He stood there, staring into the amber liquid, the wheels turning in his mind. Whatever Eleanor was up to, he would make sure she didn't get far. The pack was his now, and he wasn't about to let her take it back. The silver hair sparkled under my desk lamp like it had its own glow. I twirled it between my fingers, frowning. No way it came from the victim. He was bald as a baby. And the marks on his chest? Too deep and too sharp to be from a regular animal. This case was starting to feel like a puzzle missing its corners. When I'd hit my limit of staring at the thing, I called Dr. Evelyn. She was one of those brilliant but awkward types, always off in her own world of test tubes and strange theories. If anyone could figure out what the hair belonged to, it was her. I met her in her cramped lab behind the museum. It was filled with jars of odd specimens, old bones, and stacks of dusty books. She examined the hair through a magnifying glass, and then straightened her glasses with a sigh. "This," she said slowly, "is not human." My stomach did a little flip. Not human as in, what? Some exotic animal? Not quite. Well, let's just say I don't have anything in my records like this. It wasn't much of an answer, but it gave me chills. I thanked her and left, trying to sort out what not human could mean. On my way back to the office, I remembered my dad's stories. He'd always loved spinning tales about creatures of the night. Vampires, ghosts, and yes, Werewolves. I'd rolled my eyes back then, thinking it was just his way of keeping me out of the woods after dark. But now, I wasn't so sure. Could it be werewolves? It sounded ridiculous, but the evidence didn't lie. Something stronger, faster, and more vicious than a human was leaving bodies behind. And that hair wasn't from any dog I'd ever seen. Determined to find more answers, I returned to the Stardust Club that night. Eleanor was singing again, her voice floating over the crowd like a spell. I stayed out of sight, watching. When her set was done, she slipped off the stage and walked toward the back. I followed at a safe distance. She stepped into a side hallway and stopped short. A man was waiting there, tall and rough around the edges. His voice was low, but I caught the anger in his tone. Eleanor didn't back down. Her posture was stiff, her hands clenched at her sides. "You're making a mistake," he said, his words sharp. Her reply cut through the tense air. "You'll regret underestimating me." The man fell silent, and she stormed past him, disappearing into a door at the end of the hall. I stayed put, my mind racing. Whatever was happening here, it was bigger than I thought. Eleanor wasn't just a singer. She was playing a dangerous game, and I needed to figure out exactly what that game was. When I followed Eleanor that night, she didn't lead me to some swanky club or a secret meeting in the back room of a jazz bar. No, she walked into a crumbling old building on the edge of town, the kind you'd expect to see on a postcard titled, "What the Depression Left Behind." The windows were shattered, the bricks streaked with soot, and the only sound was the whisper of the wind slipping through the cracks. Inside, I stayed hidden near the doorway. Eleanor moved gracefully through the shadows until she reached a large open room. That's where I saw them, the scrappy pack of underdogs. They didn't look like a pack at all, really. Some leaned against the walls, their arms crossed, their faces hard. Others sat on overturned crates, eyes darting around like they expected a fight any second. A couple of younger ones huddled near a broken radiator, talking quietly. There was an air of suspicion in the room, like they weren't sure whether to stay or bolt. Eleanor stopped in the center and looked around at them. "I know you're not used to trust," she said, her voice calm but firm. "I'm not asking for blind loyalty. I'm asking for a chance." A wiry woman stepped forward, her boots clunking against the concrete floor. She couldn't have been more than 20, but the fire in her eyes made her look older. "Why should we trust you?" The young woman, Maisie I learned later, snapped. "You were a Luna, weren't you? Part of their system, and now you come here acting like you're different?" Eleanor didn't flinch. "I was betrayed. Just like you. They threw me out because I wouldn't play their games. I'm not here to drag you back under someone else's thumb. I'm here because I believe we deserve something better." Maisie folded her arms and raised an eyebrow. "Words are cheap. Prove it." Eleanor tilted her head, considering Maisie's challenge. Then she spotted one of the younger wolves near the radiator. He winced as he tried to stand, clutching his leg. Without hesitation, Eleanor crossed the room and knelt beside him. She spoke to him quietly, her voice gentle as she checked his injured leg. She took out a small first aid kit from her bag. Who knew she carried that? And began wrapping the wound. The young wolf's shoulders relaxed. His breathing steadied. The room went quiet. The wolves watched her as if seeing something new. Maisie's hard expression softened just a little. Eleanor stood up, her gaze sweeping over the group. "Strength isn't just about fighting, it's about taking care of each other. If you'll let me, I'll show you how we can be more than what they think we are." One by one, the wolves began to nod. Some still looked unsure, but they stayed. Eleanor hadn't just talked the talk. She'd shown them what kind of leader she could be, and as I slipped back into the shadows, my mind raced. Eleanor was building something here, something powerful. Whatever it was, I needed to know more. The alley smelled of damp bricks and something faintly metallic. I pressed my back against the wall, peering around the corner. The moonlight cast a silver glow, catching every movement as Eleanor led the underdogs through some sort of training. Her voice carried, calm but firm, as she showed them how to move quickly, silently. It wasn't just physical. She was teaching them to trust each other, to trust themselves. Maisie, fairy as always, kept testing her patience, snapping questions, pushing boundaries. Eleanor didn't rise to the bait. She answered each challenge with a steady tone and a confident nod. Even when one of the younger wolves fumbled, tripping over their own feet, Eleanor stepped in and showed them the move again, slower until they got it right. She didn't just talk at them. She made them feel like they belonged. It was hard not to admire her, even if I didn't quite know her game yet. Then came the interruption. Heavy boots echoed on the cobblestones before a group of men emerged from the shadows. They moved as one, their leader stepping forward with a smirk that made my stomach twist. Leo's enforcers. They were big, broad-shouldered, and radiated trouble, the kind of guys who didn't need to say much to get their point across. But they said it anyway. "You've been busy," the leader drawled, his voice rough, his hands tucked casually in his pockets. Leo doesn't like it when people stir the pot. Eleanor's posture didn't change. "I'm not interested in Leo's pot," she said, her voice calm and even. "I'm interested in something better." The enforcers spread out, cutting off any easy exits. The pack tensed, ready to fight. I could see Maisie, fists clenching, her stance shifting. One wrong move and this would turn into a brawl.
"Better isn't on the menu," the leader sneered. "You're coming with us. Or this lot," he gestured at the underdogs. "Learns what real pain feels like." For a moment, the air felt heavy, like a storm was about to break. But Eleanor didn't flinch. She stepped forward, her eyes sharp, her movements deliberate. "You think I haven't dealt with worse? You think you scare me?" The leader's smirk wavered, just a fraction. Eleanor took another step closer. "You can tell Leo this. I don't take orders from someone too scared to come here himself. If he has a problem, he can deal with me directly. Until then, leave these people out of it." Her voice carried authority, the kind that wasn't built on threats but on sheer presence. Even from my spot in the shadows, I could feel it. She didn't need to raise her voice. She didn't need to flex her muscles. She just spoke, and the words settled like weights on the enforcer's shoulders. The leader stared at her for a moment, then jerked his head. "Let's go," he muttered, backing away. The others hesitated, glancing at each other, but eventually followed.
As they melted into the night, the underdogs let out a collective breath. Maisie looked at Eleanor with something close to respect. No punches had been thrown, but Eleanor had won. Not by force, but by sheer force of will. From my hidden spot, I took it all in. Whatever Eleanor was building, it was stronger than I'd thought. I knew I couldn't just watch anymore. It was time to face her, and maybe, just maybe, figure out whose side she was really on. It was just after dawn when I found Eleanor waiting in the park. The sky was painted in soft pinks and golds, and the trees were still heavy with morning mist. The world felt calm, hushed, but I wasn't here for a peaceful stroll. "All right," I said, stepping into the clearing where she stood. "No more shadows, no more games. Who are you really, and how are you tied to those murders?" She turned slowly to face me, her green eyes wary but resolute. Her voice, when she spoke, was low and even. "I suppose you'd find out sooner or later." I crossed my arms, waiting. The early light caught the waves in her hair, and for a moment I almost believed I was talking to some storybook princess. Except, her gaze was sharp enough to cut glass. "I was their Luna once," she said, and the words hung in the air. "The pack's leader. I stood beside the alpha, ruled beside him, until I was betrayed." I didn't flinch, but I felt a flicker of something unexpected. Sympathy? No, I buried that quickly. "You expect me to believe that?" "I don't care what you believe," she said, her voice cool. I cared about my pack, about protecting them, but Leo had other ideas. He wanted power. He turned the alpha against me, spread lies, and forced me out. Her gaze dropped to the ground, and for the first time, I saw a shadow of vulnerability cross her face. I had nothing. No one. I survived, but barely, and now Leo's killing anyone who might threaten his rule. You're saying he's behind the murders? I asked. She nodded. He sees ghosts where there are none. People whispering about me coming back, about him not being the rightful beta. He's silencing them, one by one. I studied her. Her words carried a ring of truth, but I'd been lied to before. If that's the case, why not go to the alpha, or the pack itself? Tell them the truth. Her lips curled into a bitter smile. You think the pack would listen to me? The woman who was cast out? Leo's grip is strong, and he's made sure they only hear his version of the story. I let out a slow breath. It was a lot to take in, and it sounded just fantastical enough to be true. All right, here's the deal. I'll look into Leo. I'll see if I can find proof that he's the one pulling the strings. But if I find out you're not being straight with me, I don't expect leniency. She cut in, her voice sharp. I'm not looking for forgiveness. I just want justice. Her words stayed with me long after she'd disappeared into the morning fog. If she was lying, I'd find out soon enough. But if she was telling the truth, then the city's werewolf underworld was about to get a lot messier, and I'd be right in the middle of it. It was late afternoon, and I was still going over Eleanor's story in my head. Betrayed Luna, pack politics, murders. It felt like something out of a penny dreadful. I hadn't decided how much I trusted her yet, but one thing was clear. Leo needed looking into. What I didn't know was that Leo had already caught wind of my little meeting in the park. Somewhere in the heart of the city, Leo's sharp voice rang out through the dim light of his office. Moz, our nosy detective and that traitor Luna are playing nice together? He snapped. His enforcer flinched, nodding silently. Well then, Leo said, smoothing down his tie. I think it's time we gave her a reason to stop snooping. Make it look like an accident. When the attempt came, it was almost laughably predictable. I was walking down a quiet alley, too quiet in hindsight, when I heard footsteps quicken behind me. I turned just as a shadow lunged. Sorry, I'm not on tonight's menu, I said, ducking fast. A heavy fist swung over my head and hit the brick wall with a sickening crack. Before I could figure out my next move, something flashed from the other end of the alley. Eleanor. She stepped into the fading sunlight, calm and composed, but with a cold fire in her eyes. The enforcer froze, taking one look at her and deciding he liked breathing more than following orders. He bolted. Eleanor offered me a hand. Still think I'm not worth trusting? She asked. One elegant brow arched. I took her hand, brushing myself off. You could have warned me, I grumbled. Where's the fun in that? She said with a smile, but her tone carried a serious note. We can't afford to underestimate Leo anymore. He knows we're working together now. Back at my office, the two of us sat across from each other, a single desk lamp casting long shadows. All right, I said, folding my arms. If we're going to do this, we do it smart. I'll dig up the paper trail, find the evidence that ties him to the murders, but you and your friends need to handle him directly. Deal, Eleanor said, her gaze steady. But remember, I'm not doing this for you. This is about righting what he did to all of us. Fine, I said, sliding a file toward her. Just keep me in the loop, okay? I don't want another surprise attack. She smirked. I'll do my best, but you should probably sleep with one eye open, detective. You're in our world now. I watched her leave, that confident stride of hers never faltering. Whatever was coming next, I knew one thing for sure. Leo was going to regret underestimating both of us. The envelope in my hands felt heavier than it should. Inside were documents that could finally nail Leo. The kind of proof no one could ignore. Bribes, payoffs, underhanded deals. They were all there. I spent hours digging through them, organizing them, making sure every page would hit like a punch to the gut. Tonight at the Stardust Club, I planned to lay it all out. No more hiding, no more shadows. Leo's house of cards was about to fall. When I arrived at the speakeasy, the place was packed. Jazz music drifted from the corner, people laughed over their drinks, and the hum of conversation filled the air. It all seemed so normal, so carefree. But I knew what was coming. I scanned the room, spotting wolves mixed in with the human crowd. Most had no idea what was about to go down. Eleanor stood near the bar, quiet but composed. When our eyes met, she gave me a small nod. She wasn't here to sing tonight. She was. As the band wrapped up their set, Eleanor stepped onto the small stage. The room grew quiet, not because she asked for it, but because her presence demanded it. She didn't hold a microphone this time. She didn't need one. "Most of you know me as a singer," she began, her voice clear and strong. "But I'm here tonight not as an entertainer. I'm here as someone who has been lied to, betrayed, and cast out. I'm here as someone who has seen what happens when power is twisted into something cruel." Her words rippled through the crowd. I could see the wolves shifting uneasily, their ears practically pricking up at the tone of her voice. "Leo," she said, her voice steady, "is not the leader you think he is. He has taken lives, ruined families, and silenced anyone who stood in his way. And I have the proof right here." I stepped forward then, holding up the envelope. "This," I said, "contains records that tie Leo to the murders. Payments made to keep mouths shut, evidence of his betrayal of the pack." Before I could hand it to Eleanor, the speakeasy's doors slammed open. Leo stormed in, his enforcers flanking him like a pack of wolves on the hunt. The music stopped, and a chill spread through the room. The echoing sounds floated through the room. "You think you can walk in here and spout lies about me?" Leo's voice was low and dangerous. "You think these people will listen to a traitor and a meddling human?" Eleanor didn't move from the stage. She stood tall, her gaze locked on Leo. "They'll listen because the truth has a way of coming out, no matter how hard you try to bury it." The crowd began to murmur, shifting uncomfortably. The wolves in the room were torn, their loyalties wavering. "Show them the evidence," Eleanor said, her voice rising. "Show them who he really is." I pulled out the documents, holding them high. "These papers," I said, my voice ringing out, "show every dirty deal, every blood-stained coin. Leo isn't just a liar, he's a murderer. And now everyone will know." Leo's enforcers growled low in their throats, ready to pounce. But Eleanor stepped forward, her presence like a force field. "You want to silence me, Leo? Go ahead and try. But you'll have to do it in front of everyone. Let them see who you really are." For a moment, the tension was so thick you could cut it with a knife. Then something shifted. One of the wolves in the crowd stepped forward. Then another. They weren't looking at Leo anymore. They were looking at Eleanor, believing her, trusting her. Leo's smirk faltered, just for a second. Then he turned on his heel and stormed out, his enforcers following close behind. The room was left in stunned silence. Eleanor stood there for a long moment, taking in the faces of those around her. The tide had turned. This was only the beginning, but it was enough for now. The alley was a storm of snarls, snapping teeth and flying claws. Leo's wolves came in fast, their growls like thunder. Eleanor's pack, scrappy, rough around the edges, stood their ground. They were outnumbered but not outmatched. Each move they made was sharp and precise, a reflection of the trust Eleanor had built among them. Maisie darted forward, dodging a heavy swing from one of Leo's bruisers. "That all you got?" she taunted, her grin flashing. Before the enforcer could react, she swept his legs out from under him, sending him crashing to the ground. I stayed close to the edge, gripping the folder of evidence in my hands. This wasn't my fight, at least not physically, but I knew my role was just as important. Over the chaos, Eleanor's voice rang out, steady and calm. Hold the line, we do this together. Her pack rallied to her words, forming a tight formation and turning the tide of the battle. Then I saw him, the alpha. He stood at a distance, watching it all unfold, his face unreadable. I took a deep breath and made my way toward him, keeping low and careful. When I reached him, I didn't waste time. Here, I said, thrusting the folder into his hands. This is everything you need to know about Leo's dirty deeds, his murders, his betrayals. It's all in there. He looked down at the folder, then back at me. His expression softened as he flipped through the pages, the weight of the truth sinking in. She's been telling the truth, he murmured, more to himself than to me. Yes, I said firmly, and she's risking her life right now to stop him. The alpha squared his shoulders. When he turned toward the fray, his voice boomed. Enough. The fighting paused, the wolves on both sides turning to look at him. His eyes locked on Leo, and he pointed a firm finger. You've lied to me. To all of us. You're no beta. You're a coward. Leo growled low, his posture defensive. You're making a mistake. No, the alpha replied. I'm correcting one. He nodded toward Eleanor. Stand down. She's our true leader. With those words, the underdogs surged forward, their confidence renewed. The remaining enforcers lost their nerve. One by one, they fell back, leaving Leo cornered. Eleanor stepped forward, her gaze steady. Give it up, Leo, she said, her voice firm but without malice. It's over. Leo looked around, his arrogance crumbling. Then, with a low snarl, he turned and ran. No one followed. The pack had made their choice, and it wasn't him. When the dust settled, the wolves gathered around Eleanor, their heads bowed in respect. The alpha approached her, offering a small, respectful nod. You've earned this. The pack is yours again. Eleanor looked at him for a long moment, then shook her head. No, she said quietly. The old ways don't work anymore. I'll lead my pack, our pack, but it won't be the same hierarchy as before. We'll start fresh. The alpha seemed taken aback, but he nodded again. You've got my support, whatever you choose. Eleanor turned to her group, the scrappy, mismatched wolves who had fought so fiercely. She smiled, a real, genuine smile. We'll do it our way this time, she said. Together. As the wolves cheered softly, I slipped away into the shadows. My part in their story was done, but something told me this was only the beginning of theirs. The case was closed. For the first time in weeks, I let out a long, slow breath. The documents had done their job, and Leo's hold on the pack was shattered. Eleanor's new group was up and running, and the city, at least for now, felt a little quieter, a little safer. I packed away the last of the files, making sure everything was in order. My office, usually cluttered with papers and coffee cups, felt strangely empty without the constant buzz of this case hanging over it. Still, the silence was welcome. As I stepped outside, the cool evening air brushed against my face. The streets were alive with the usual chatter of the city, cars rumbling by, laughter spilling out of a nearby cafe. It all felt normal, the kind of normal that reminded me why I did this job in the first place. Eleanor had found her place too. I'd heard through the grapevine that she'd turned that old building into a sanctuary. The wolves who had nowhere else to go, rejected by their packs, left on the edges of society, now had a home, a place where they could belong. It wasn't just about safety, it was about building something new, something better. I never said goodbye to her directly. She didn't seem the type who needed that, but I knew we had an understanding. We'd come from different worlds, different lives, but for a brief time, we'd worked together for something bigger than ourselves. That was enough. I turned up my collar and walked toward the bright lights of downtown, letting the rhythm of the city pull me forward. It wasn't a fairy tale ending, but it was a good one. And sometimes, that's all you need.